Never settle. Never settle. Don't ever get a tattoo, but if you have to get a tattoo on the inside of your skull with those two words. Never settle. Now, what do I mean by never settling? Okay, it's very simple. The dictionary definition of the word to settle means to accept a less optimal solution to any given problem or situation, right? Think of it in these terms, like you're climbing Mount Everest and you can see the peak, right? But it's too hard. And so instead of going for the peak, you just sort of like squat wherever you are on the road to the peak and you say, well, this is good enough for me. That's settling. Don't do it, okay? On the big things in life and the big questions of life, you're going to set objectives for yourself. You're going to decide insofar as your career that you want to reach, a certain level. You're going to decide that you want to have a family with a certain kind of woman. You're going to decide that you're going to want to have a certain kind of social position in wherever you happen to live, right? In these things, the important things in life, you never settle. And the reason is quite simple. If you settle, you will spend the rest of your life regretting it. Now, let me go into a little detail about this whole situation. First of all, don't confuse settling with compromise. A lot of people do that. Compromise is necessary in life, but you compromise the little byways on your road to your big objectives in life. You see the difference? It's sort of like this. You see, think of it like in horizontal terms and vertical terms, right? On a horizontal level, perhaps there's a guy who wants this and you want to work with him and you want this. And so you sort of like come to a compromise so that you work together so you can go on your path, right? That's a compromise and that's perfectly normal. It's perfectly healthy. It's perfectly necessary for most of life. Most of the times you're going to find that in order to get an objective that you want, you're going to have to compromise on the road to that objective. But not on the objective itself. See, if you're compromising on the side to side, that's one thing. But settling on the vertical, that is, you're shooting for something high and you compromise and start to aim low. You're shooting for the moon and decide that, Tulsa, Oklahoma is good enough for you. You see what I'm saying? You see the difference between the two? Because you see, when you're settling, what it is that you're saying to yourself that you once had an objective in life and that objective was just too difficult and you decided to lower your sights. That's very different. That is not compromising. That is settling. That is something that you never want to do. Now, many times in life, you're going to meet people who refuse to quote unquote settle for the little things. Okay, let me give you an example, a very easy one. Suppose you go out one night and you have your sights set on having a steak dinner, right? And you say to yourself, I want a filet mignon. I want to go and have myself a filet mignon steak at some nice restaurant. And you find a nice restaurant and they just don't happen to have filet mignon. They have, I don't know, lobster or some other shit, right? So what do? Well, you settle, that's good enough because it's a fucking restaurant, okay? Don't worry about the little things in life. Worry about the big things in life, okay? Lots of people, lots of guys refuse to settle on the little things in life and paradoxically wind up settling on the big things in life. And I'll tell you a specific example. I remember this happened 30 years ago. No, actually 40 years ago, now that I think about it. It happened to me 40 years ago. I was a 10-year-old boy. And there was this adult, it doesn't matter who he was, this adult, this man, he wanted to go and see, with a group of his friends, he wanted to go and see Apocalypse Now. Apocalypse Now had just come out in theaters, right? And at that time, this was 1979, at that time, not every theater had Dolby Stereo. Only some theaters had Dolby Stereo. So this man insisted that they had to go to the theater with Dolby Stereo. Now, this is way before internet, and in the papers, it didn't even say which theater had Dolby Stereo and which did not. So he forced his little party of people to go from cinema to find out which one had Dolby Theater. Dolby Surround, Dolby Stereo, whatever the fuck it was, right? He forced his group of friends to go from cinema to cinema, and they finally found one, and when they finally found the one that had it, right, the movie had already started, and so they would have walked in the middle of the movie, and so they decided not to go to see Apocalypse Now. That was fucking insane, okay? Do keep in mind, this guy was not in the movie industry or some shit like that, okay? There was no reason, it didn't really matter to go and see the movie in Dolby Stereo or without Dolby Stereo. It didn't matter, and yet this guy refused to settle, and he harped about it. This man, and I remember I was a 10-year-old boy, 11-year-old boy, and I remember this man harping on the fact that he refused to settle on this trivial thing. And here's the kicker. This guy, and I knew his life real well, he was an uncle of mine. This guy had the same shitty job for going on like 30 years or something like that. And he would constantly complain about his coworkers that they weren't very capable and he was so smart, but he never tried to rise within his corporation or change corporations. No, he settled right where he was, in this little middle management position. And insofar as his family life, it was equally, just settling, just like a crappy personal life. Everything in his life, insofar as the major decisions of his life, he settled. He didn't go for broke. He didn't try to reach his ambition. On the little things in life, on where to see a fucking movie, on those things, he wouldn't settle. And the hypothetical I said about, not finding a filet mignon dinner, on that fucking thing, he would have gone from restaurant to restaurant because he did it on the fucking movie thing. Who gives a shit about the little things? Settle on the little things. They're not important. That's why they're little. On the big things, don't settle. On the big things, your career objectives, your personal objectives. It is better to not have a family than to have a shitty family. It is better to not have a career than a shitty career. A shitty career, shitty family in your eyes. You have to decide what kind of life you want to have. That is your job when you're young. When you're young, you have to figure out, what do you want in life? And you have to figure it out. And it's hard because, think about it. When you're a child, you want to be, a fucking fireman or something like that. I wanted to be an astronaut, right? And of course, I quote unquote settled because I realized it was unrealistic for me, for my talents and my abilities and so forth and so on. And also, it was just not something that I really wanted to do. As I grew up, as I got into my late teens, my 20s, and even my 30s, I started realizing what the objectives I wanted out of life. And I set those in my mind and I stuck to them. And I didn't settle on most of them. And here comes a painful thing that I did. On a couple of things in my life, not top tier ambitions, but sort of like second tier ambitions, I did settle. I decided that here was good enough on a couple of issues. Not big ones, thankfully, but pretty up there. Not like the top tier ambitions in life, but sort of like the second tier ambitions in life. And a couple of those, I did settle, and I regret it to this day. It's not something that, it itches at me every day. It's not something that I'm like, oh, my life is a ruin. No, my life is fucking great. But I do have these regrets that I settled on a couple of things that I shouldn't have settled. I should have tried harder, pushed more. But in these secondary things that I settled on, I thought to myself, it's good enough. And that was wrong. That was wrong of me. Because what happens is, when you settle, what happens is that, life continues and you sort of like stop. And as life continues, you realize that you could have continued on, kept on, and you would have reached that goal. That's regret. That's the feeling you get with regret. It seems to me that you stop growing. You stop developing. There is less energy in your soul. It's not so much that you sort of like give up. It's sort of like a piece of your soul starts to die. And you sort of see this with people. You sense this with people who have given up on their professional ambitions, given up on their personal ambitions. You see how they just don't have quite that spirit, that energy. Correlation is not causation. It could be that they just ran out of energy and that's why they settled, but I don't think so. In my own experience, it seems to me that the people who at some point, at some level, decide to settle and declare that where they're at is just good enough, that's when the death of their soul starts to happen. That's when they seem to run out of energy. I'm 50 years old, right? And you see me in these videos, right? Do I seem like a guy who's given up on life, who's just not trying anymore, who's just coasting? No, I'm still trying because I still feel that there are objectives in my life that I have yet to achieve, that I want to achieve. I'm not settling. Now, there are certain objectives that I currently have that I realistically know that I'll never achieve, but I'm still striving. It's the fact of that striving that fills your life with energy, with drive, with push. You know what I mean? And these goals that I have that I suspect I will never achieve, even though I suspect I will never achieve them, I still go for them, and that effort makes me feel wonderful, makes me feel alive. A lot of people say that you should settle, that it's the sensible thing. Oh, you didn't reach Everest, but you came close. It's, what is it? I think it's 28,000 feet, Mount Everest. Say it's 28,000. You got to 25,000 feet. That was so close. Yeah, but close is not Everest, right? Close is just close. I'd prefer to die on Everest having failed to reach the peak than to give up. Because this is the one life you have. You're never going to have another one. If you decide to settle and you say, this is good enough, then that objective that you had set for yourself, it's not that you're never going to reach it in this life and maybe in some future time, in some future life, you will reach it. No, no, no. Once you settle, that's it. You will never reach it. I can't live like that. And neither should you. Living like that, of settling, no. I'm just not being very articulate in this video. I'm trying to be articulate, but it's something just so in me. Because, like I said, a couple of things that I have given up on, I so regretted it. Thank God they weren't important things. But I regretted it so much. It was like, Jesus Christ, what the fuck, man? Now, I think to myself, because this happened 10 years ago, right? More, 12 years ago, that I gave up on a couple of things that, like I said, they weren't top tier priorities, but they were up there, and I gave up on them. And I'm like, what the fuck? Why? Why did I do that? Because I realize now that I would have reached those goals. I would have reached them. You see, that's the thing that's infuriating. The fact that my 36 or 38-year-old self gave up on a few things, right? And now, as a 50-year-old, I realize I would have reached them if I'd given it my all on those things. You see? And I think that regret that I have on these second-tier things that I did give up on, that I did settle, I think the fact that my regret on those things eggs me on insofar as the bigger things. Makes me continue to strive for the bigger things, because I know for a fact that life tends to turn around. Life turns, your luck turns, and you think at some given moment, you might think right now that you're never going to reach your Everest, but you will be surprised. Fortune turns so fucking quickly. Fortune turns around, and all of a sudden you thought you were beneath the wheel, and all of a sudden you realize you're on top of the wheel and you can reach your Everest. You can reach out and grab it. And you do. That's the beauty of life. See? You can never really predict it. That's the beauty of life. That's why you should never settle. Oh man, this video, it's shitty because I'm not being articulate and logical, but believe me on this, okay? Trust me. Okay, never fucking settle.